A thirsty man standing at the edge of the ocean can still remain thirsty just because he fears he doesn't know the right way to drink water. Isn't that strange?
But that's exactly the pain I've carried for years. I had ideas, dreams, everything, but my tongue was locked behind the fear of perfect English.
It took me years to break that lock, and this is the truth that can either change your future or quietly destroy your career.
Now, the stories you're about to watch will follow a perfect learning style.
Words will appear on your screen. Listen to them carefully and repeat them out loud.
So you don't just watch, you actually learn and feel the change within you.
There was a young man in those dying days of the 19th century when the world still believed in the tyranny of perfection. A boy whose mind burned with visions that would have set empires trembling, yet whose lips remained sealed as though by some invisible curse. His thoughts, oh, what magnificent thoughts they were, tumbled through his consciousness like a river of stars, bright and boundless and full of meaning. But when he opened his mouth to speak them aloud, something deeper than fear took hold. It was not merely the dread of judgment, though that lived in him too. No, it was something far more exquisite in its cruelty. It was the terror of uttering words in a manner that was not absolutely, entirely, and perfectly correct. He existed in a prison of grammar. Every sentence he considered was scrutinized through the merciless lens of a phantom schoolmaster who lived in his breast. Would the subjunctive mood be properly employed? Were his prepositions situated at the prescribed distance from their objects? Could someone with education, someone from the great cities of the world, find fault in his construction? And so, he said nothing. For years, he said nothing at all. Carob, the deep, suffocating anguish that the ancient peoples knew so well, settled upon him like dust upon a tomb. It covered him entirely. It choked him. While other young men spoke with careless abandon, sharing their ideas and building empires from their words, he remained silent. While conversations bloomed around him like gardens in spring, he stood apart, a witness only, a ghost in his own existence. The world moved forward without him. Opportunities, great shining opportunities that required only his voice to seize them, passed like ships in the night. He watched them go. He always watched them go. And the silence grew heavier with each passing year, until he could scarcely remember what his own voice sounded like when it was not trapped behind his teeth. Years accumulated. The young man became older, and still his lips held their covenant with silence. He had inherited a modest sum from a distant relative, enough to sustain him if he lived simply and asked for nothing. So he traveled. Perhaps in movement, he thought, he might find some reprieve from the endless internal dialogue of self-condemnation. He journeyed to distant lands, over mountains and through valleys, seeking something he could not name. What was it that drew him forward? Some whisper of salvation? Some distant hope that the world might transform him if he wandered far enough? But the world, it seemed, wished only to mirror his own despair back at him. The landscapes grew barren. The cities grew sparse. The paths grew narrower and more desolate, until one day he found himself alone in a great desert, vast and silent and pitiless under a sun that seemed intent upon his destruction. The sand stretched before him in every direction, undulating like the surface of a frozen sea. His lips cracked. His throat burned as though he had swallowed fire. His eyes grew dim with the glare of
endless dunes. And yet there was something pulling him forward. It was not hope. He had abandoned hope long ago. It was something closer to obsession, or perhaps to destiny itself. He walked through that desert for days, though he could not remember how many. The sun rose and fell. Stars appeared like the eyes of watching angels. His body grew thinner. His mind grew strange. But still he walked. Still he was drawn onward by something he could not resist. Then, one morning, he crested a ridge of sand and saw it. The ocean. Vast and magnificent and impossibly blue, stretching to the horizon like a vision from scripture. The water glimmered in the sunlight, beautiful beyond measure, alive with movement and sound. His heart, that organ which he had thought dead within him, suddenly surged with something like hope, water, life, salvation. He stumbled down the dune toward the shore, his legs barely able to carry him, his breath coming in great gasps. He reached the edge of the water and fell to his knees. The waves lapped gently at the sand before him. Never in his life had anything seemed more desirable, more necessary, more essential to his continued existence. His throat was raw agony. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to drink. The water was there, mere inches from his lips, cool and clear and perfect
in its purity. But he did not drink.
Instead, he remained there, kneeling before the ocean like a penitent before an altar, his hands frozen at his sides. And why? Why would a dying man refuse the very water that might save him? Because he did not know the proper way to drink it. He did not know if he should cup his hands in such a manner or cup them in another manner entirely. Should he kneel thus or thus? Should he drink quickly or slowly, with deliberate pauses between each swallow? What was the correct method? What was the perfect technique employed by those with education and refinement? The fear gripped him as fiercely as the thirst. He sat at the water's edge and wept. Though his tears were bitter and few, his body too desiccated to produce true weeping. He was dying, yes, dying not from lack of water, but from his inability to perform the act of drinking with absolute perfection. How many days had he been without liquid? 3? 4? More? His vision blurred. His mind wandered through strange landscapes of memory and fever dream. He saw himself as a child, saw the schoolmaster's ruler descending upon his knuckles, heard the voice of criticism that had never truly ceased echoing in his ears. Is this not the deepest tragedy, the most exquisite and terrible form of human suffering? To be surrounded by abundance and yet to starve? To be desperate for life itself and yet to reject the very means of obtaining it because of fear of imperfection? He looked at his hands, thin and trembling and absolutely pathetic in their weakness, and he felt a shame so profound that it seemed to crack open his very soul. The sun was setting now. Brilliant colors blazed across the sky, crimson and gold and purple, and they illuminated the water, making it seem even more impossibly beautiful and alive. This would be his final night. He could feel the certainty of it settling upon him like snow. He would not see tomorrow's dawn. The knowledge was strange, not frightening, but merely factual. He had wasted it all, every moment, every possibility, every potential word that might have changed his life might have connected him with another soul, might have lifted him from this pit of his own making. In the darkness, something shifted within him. It was not sudden, not like a lightning bolt striking the earth. It was more like a slow, grinding fracture, a breaking down of the walls he had constructed with such care over so many years. He looked at his hands again.
Imperfect hands. Clumsy hands. Hands that had never learned the proper way to do anything. And he thought, what difference does it make now? What difference could it possibly make? He moved without conscious thought. His hands plunged into the water. He brought them to his lips, dripping and awkward and entirely imperfect in their method. The water entered his mouth, cool and sweet and more alive than anything he had ever experienced. It was clumsy and desperate and utterly devoid of grace or refinement. And it was the most beautiful thing he had ever known. He drank again, gulping roughly, clumsily, his chin wet with water that spilled past his lips, his hands cupped and filled and brought the liquid to his mouth again and again, messy and inelegant, and absolutely entirely perfect in its imperfection. Life, genuine, vivid, pulsing life, flooded back into his limbs. Not the life of physical sustenance alone, though that was certainly part of it, but something far greater. It was as though in that moment of finally letting go of the demand for perfection, he had grasped something infinitely more valuable. The fear had not disappeared. The doubt had not vanished entirely. But he had drunk despite them. He had acted despite them. He had chosen thirst, chosen life, over the alternative of perfection in silence. When morning came, he was still kneeling at the water's edge. He could move now. His strength, while not yet fully returned, had begun to pour back into his body, like the tides returning to the shore. He looked at the ocean stretching before him, vast and mysterious and indifferent to his struggles. And he understood finally what it had been trying to teach him all along. The water had not required perfection from him. It did not judge the manner of his drinking. It asked only that he drink, that he receive what it had to offer, that he allow himself to live. He stood. His legs were weak, but they held him. He turned away from the desert he had crossed, away from the silence and the fear and the phantom schoolmaster who had dwelt so long in his heart. And he walked along the shore. There would be people ahead, he knew. There would be opportunity to speak, to share his thoughts, to use words, imperfectly perhaps, but genuinely, desperately, authentically his own. And though the fear would never entirely leave him, though part of him would always hear the voice of criticism, he would speak anyway. He would drink anyway. He would live anyway. Because the only thing worse than imperfection